Hi, I'm Mayor Marty Walsh, and I want to thank Toy Burton and DeeDee's Cry for the incredible work they do in the Boston community all year long. And I want to thank all of them for organizing this event today. Mental health is just as important as physical health, and seeking and accepting help is a sign of strength. That's especially true right now. The pandemic has added a whole new set of challenges to everyday life. For people who were struggling before, it can even be harder to manage this added weight. I'm here to tell you it's okay to feel fear and anxiety. We'll feel that for some time. This is an important time to take care of yourself. We're all handling this the best we can. And the only thing we can do is take one day at a time. If you need someone to talk to, you have options. You can call your healthcare provider to get set up with a telehealth counselor. Or you can call 311 at the city, our hotline, to get connected to anonymous counseling over the phone. I know that DeeDee's Cry is going to share some important resources with you today. I want to thank the panelists for coming together and sharing their stories. In times like these, it's important to support one another and find ways to connect. I wish you all the very best, and I thank you for creating a positive change in our community.
Thank you, our Mayor of Boston, Marty Walsh. Hello, everyone out there in Facebook Live. Thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Robin Saunders, and we're going to spend some time together. We're going to share this space together for about an hour and a half. We wanted to create a space and opportunity to have different topics of discussion with you. And tonight, thank goodness, DeeDee's Cry decided the topic would be mental health in METCO, and actually Black mental health in METCO. But before we get to that, I'd like to also acknowledge that we have guest panelists tonight. We'll be introducing them in a minute, but let's all get into the frame of mind for tonight's topic of discussion. We know this is the end of August, almost September. September, we're always thinking about school. We got public school, charter school, METCO schools, private schools, a whole configuration of schools here in Massachusetts, and especially in Boston. And for that, we are very, I can say lucky actually, because a lot of other states and cities do not have so many choices that we have. And we all know, since tonight's topic is going to be on METCO, that many hundreds and thousands of our Black and Brown students have benefited from their educational experiences from METCO. But with that, we also know and are aware that there are some tolls that come with being in the METCO system. Some of those tolls may be emotional, social, physical, psychological, and even financial. So let's tonight talk about some experiences that our panelists have had, and maybe and hopefully that hearing their stories will help us come up with some ideas to help those that also are going to be in the METCO system that might be able to help them as they further their educational process with METCO while being Black and Brown in that system. But before we do that, I want to say thank you to our supporters of DeeDee's Cry, which is the presenter of tonight's program. Always, we want to thank the Louis D. Brown Peace Institute, also annual Roxbury Unity Parade, and also Java with Jimmy, which is live on Facebook every day. All of these organizations are the supporters of DeeDee's Cry. I'm going to hand the mic over to Toy Burton, the founder of DeeDee's Cry, and then she's going to hand the mic back over to our moderator. But I forgot to say who our guests are. So we'll after you're done, Toy, we'll say hello to our guest.
Okay. So like Robin said, my name is Toy Burton, and I am the founder and executive director of DeeDee's Cry Suicide Prevention and Family Support. DeeDee's Cry is named after my sister, Denita Shayne Morris, who died by suicide in 1986 when she was 23 years old. I started DeeDee's Cry in 2017 after I noticed that organizations that focus on mental health and suicide prevention really didn't do their events in the Roxbury, Dorchester, Mattapan communities of color. So I thought that I was going to start my own organization because of their lack of racial equity. I wanted to start my own organization that brings mental health awareness and suicide prevention and make it accessible to communities of color. So that's why DeeDee's Cry events will always be free. I feel like you shouldn't have to pay for information. But yeah, and I just want to thank my panelists for being here, and I want to hear your stories, and I want to thank you for sharing your stories. So I will turn that back over to James.
Well, real quick, let me just introduce who
Yes,
our
Robin.
panelists are.
Thank you.
Our friends on the panel tonight, friends and family, we want to welcome going out to Bianca Sullivan for being here. She was a METCO student in Wellesley. We also have Nieisha Deed, who did METCO in the town of Sharon. Also Brianna Miller, thank you for being here, METCO in Brookline. Also Chance Santos was at METCO in the town of Newton. And also Karma Freeman, she's currently a college student and did METCO in the town of Wayland. And now the mic goes to James.
Good evening, everyone. I have the opportunity and pleasure of being your moderator and also setting some context this evening for the subject around METCO and mental health while being Black. I did not attend METCO, but I remember having friends and family members that did. And I remember hearing stories from great experiences, but also hearing stories of interesting interactions, them being Black or Latino and from Boston, and going into certain areas of the various spaces that were named today. There were some interesting experiences rather. We understand that education takes a certain level of concentration. And if you are constantly dealing with issues of race while you are out there trying to study, whether in elementary school, middle school, or high school, it was more than likely a distraction. So what we're doing tonight, we're going to hear from our panelists. We're going to hear about their experiences. We're going to hear about how they overcame some of their experiences, as well as we will hear about maybe some advice they would like to give to young people who are in METCO now. And let's be very transparent. Issues of racism and equity are not confined just to the METCO program. There are young people from Roxbury, Dorchester, and Mattapan that attend Boston public schools and unfortunately have dealt with issues of race and class as well. But tonight we're focusing on being mental health while being Black and being a METCO student. So at this time, I would like to ask the panelists if they would introduce themselves. And I'm basically going to go in the order of those who are appearing on my screen. And we're going to start with Karma. If you could be the first one, if you could introduce yourself and tell us, remind us again, Robin mentioned it, but remind us again the school that you attended. And then also, if you could describe your METCO experience in one word. And we're going to come back around after that and talk about that one word. But Karma, if you could kick us off. Nieisha, I see you thinking, but Karma, everybody else, go ahead and think. Bianca, you have the pleasure of being last, so you'll be good. But Karma, if you could tell us who you are, a little bit about yourself, where you went to school in METCO, and then one word that you would use to describe your experience.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. My name is Karma Freeman. I am currently going into my sophomore year at UMass Boston. I attended Wayland Public Schools from 1st grade to 12th. And I would describe, there's actually a lot of words that could describe my experience in METCO, but I would probably say the best word to describe my METCO experience would be learning.
Okay, learning, and that's definitely a good thing. That's definitely a good thing. We're going to come back and talk about learning and talk about some context of your experience while learning. And Brianna, you're next on the screen. It's great to see you here. We talk often, but it's great to see you here on this call. And if you could also introduce yourself, tell us where you went to school, and if you could describe your METCO experience in one word. And Karma, sorry if I did not frame it more detailed. In the space of sort of a mental health experience, what was the impact? How was the experience there? So Brianna, if you could, with that further clarity, let us know what your experience was and while you're introducing yourself.
Thank you, James, and thank you, Toy and Robin. And thank you for all the panelists that are joining tonight. I am Brianna Miller. I went to Brookline, second to, and I graduated high school there. I would describe my experience, well, currently I work in the political realm, and I honestly attribute that to being in METCO, because I say this often, Brookline is where I really learned what racism was. So I describe it in one word as traumatizing.
Interesting. We're going to dig deeper there. We're definitely going to dig deeper there. Nieisha, I've talked to you a couple of times. I did not know you attended METCO. So it's interesting seeing you in this space, just learning more about you. Can you introduce yourself? Tell us where you went to school, and if you could describe your METCO experience within one word.
I'm a DeeDee's Cry veteran. Are you kidding
yes,
me? Like,
listen.
Come on. You know I was going to be on here. Hi, everybody. My name is Nieisha Deed. I am a product of Sharon METCO. I went from first grade all the way to 12th grade there. And after that, went to school and started my career in corporate accounting. And then some things happened, and now I am in the mental health space, doing work on mental health advocacy and sharing my story. And if I were to say one word that described my experience at Sharon, I would say it was different.
Different.
Or
okay.
Mentally different.
Okay, we're going to dig deeper into that. And Chance, the only brother representing the METCO student population this evening, if you could tell, I'm loving that t-shirt, sir. If you could, I would presume it's something that has something to do with Black Panther as well. And we want to acknowledge, definitely we want to acknowledge the passing of Chadwick Boseman on yesterday. And that's a whole nother Zoom and live in itself, the impact that Black Panther and he had on our community. But Chance, if you could tell us about your experience. And we know that, with males and females, there is a little bit of a difference when it comes to how racism and perceptions and implicit biases display themselves. So if you could tell us who you are, where you went to school, and if you could describe your experience with METCO as well in one word.
Okay, well, as you already know, my name is Chance Santos. I went to METCO. I started actually, I believe, in second grade, and I was there all the way through 12th. And I feel it's very important for me to add to the fact that I was a high school dropout, because that plays into the trauma. So, yeah, I have a very interesting story because as far as I'm concerned, my trauma started way before METCO. So once I added METCO to that, it just added to the trauma that was already existed within my livelihood. So I'm definitely interested in getting into hearing everyone else on the panel's stories, as well as being able to share my own.
Thank you so much.
And the one word I would use, I would have to go with, I'm going to take two words: traumatizing and clarity.
Yeah. All right. We're going to go deeper into that. If you traumatizing and clarity. All right. I'm not going to touch it now.
Yes.
Not going to touch it now.
Mm-hmm.
Chance, we're going to dig deeper into that. Bianca, if you could, thank you. Last but not least, if you could introduce yourself, tell us where you went to school, and if you could describe your METCO experience in a sentence. Since you were last, we'll give you that literary privilege to describe it in the form of a sentence.
Sounds good. Hi, everyone. My name is Bianca Sullivan, and thank you for this opportunity. I am a product of Wellesley METCO. I attended the METCO program from 1st through 12th grade. As a result of my METCO experience, I was encouraged to attend the illustrious Howard University. And if I were to describe my METCO experience in one word, it would be uncomfortable.
Uncomfortable. Okay. So we have a lot of few words here We have a lot of few words, Lord. We have a few words to describe the experiences that you all talked about. Karma, if I believe you said learning. Brianna, if I believe you said traumatizing. Nieisha, you said different. Chance, you said traumatizing and clarity. And Bianca, you said, just that quick, I forgot. You said, remind me what you said.
Uncomfortable.
Uncomfortable.
Yeah.
All right. So what I want to do is go in kind of this order again. I want to sort of end with the traumatizing piece because I presume we'll dig a lot deeper into that. But Karma, you talked about learning. And the presumption would be that you're talking about your academic experience. But it could be that you and Chance are on the same level of talking about learning and clarity. So what did you mean by learning? And remember, we're talking in the realm of mental health while Black, but you're mixed with your experience being in METCO. So can you dig a little bit deeper and tell the audience what you meant by learning? What was it that you learned while you were in METCO in this context of mental health while Black?
Personally, I can speak to both levels, both academic and on a personal level of learning. I feel like they put out a vision that they want us to do well, but typically they lack the normal help they would give other of our peers. So in a learning experience, I feel like it was very often that me and my fellow METCO brothers and sisters often were put off more towards like needing that extra mile of help. But I feel like it was more so to the point because they want us to do well and be productive and like actually put out this view like, oh, we're helping them. But in reality, I feel like they were trying to make us learn on a different level because they viewed us differently. So that's one with the learning part. For a personal aspect, I feel like I learned not only a lot about like who I was on an academic level, but also who I was in my community and who I was to the people around me. Also who what position I held in a lot of people's lives while attending Wayland, because not only did I have a lot of people that I learned who were really there for me and really stood behind me no matter what, regarding like race issues or ethnicity in that matter, but also a learning experience in the matter that I also was able, it was an eye opener to see who really didn't, as seeing that I went through METCO from 1st to 12th grade, and actually learning as the years went on who actually stood behind the METCO program and like wanted us to be there, wanted us to do well, wanted to see us all combined in a community as we should be.
And I want to come back to you. We'll have sort of an open discussion, sort of a back and forth, just open later. But I want to come back to the fact about how you kind of talked about the fact that you felt that though they wanted you to achieve, if you would mind me to paraphrase, it almost seemed like we need the bad kids to do well, or there was this extra sort of thing of we want the, if you will, Black kids or the kids from Boston, you know, we want them to do well. We set this standard, but it almost seemed, I don't want to put words in your mouth. We're going to come back to that. Chance, if I could pull on you a little bit based on the context that Karma gave, you talked about, she said learning and she talked about an academic experience, but you said clarity, and then Nieisha be in ready in queue to talk about your piece around different, and then I'm going to come to Bianca and then and Brianna, and we're going to talk out this traumatizing piece. But Chance, did you have, what was the clarity when you said it was traumatizing? What was the clarity that you had when you were a METCO student? Clarity from what?
Okay, well, when I say clarity, what I'm making reference to is my acknowledging the difference between the two different educations I was getting, meaning my education from being a METCO student in Newton and my education as a young Black man living in Dorchester. So it gave me clarity of the differences.
Mm.
And how can I say this? It wasn't a good clarity. Because for me, and even to this day, and this is something that I want the other panelists to speak upon too. Why, as much as I understand why METCO was created and the intention of it, why is it that Black and brown people have to go to schools in white areas in order to get a decent education? Because the issue that I have with that is, I feel like when we do that, we're taking away from ourselves, because they're not going to truly give us what we need. They're giving us what they have. Therefore, they're making us more like them. I want to be me. I'm a Black man. I don't want to learn your white education. Forgive me for saying it that way, but that's just my personal opinion. So I saw the differences. Things as simple as being in a community where the kids, the people would leave their doors wide open and they're at work. They're not even home. The kids are leaving their bicycles on the front lawn, no protection. So as a kid from the inner city, a lot of us, we were like, wow, people actually live like this? Because we had to, hey, you wasn't gonna leave your bike out there on the street. Stop playing, that thing was gone. So I saw the differences in that aspect, but what made my situation even more interesting is my grandmother, who I was raised by, and I'll get into that a little bit later on, but she intentionally put me in Newton. The reason why was before we moved to Boston, my grandmother lived right in Newton Center. So as a Black family in Newton way back then, they were pretty well known because there weren't too many of them. And I'm talking back in the 60s and 70s, early 70s. So my grandmother came and had to take us from New York because my mother and father were in New York, drinking and drugging, not doing what they needed to do. So I already had that trauma on my plate going into this. And then even before METCO, when I was in first grade, mind you, I told you I was raised in Dorchester. We got bused to Roslindale, and I was about 5 years old. Here's more trauma. Being bused to Roslindale, having a whole bunch of white people standing outside the school with a whole bunch of little picket signs, using racial epithets, and I'm 5 years old having to get off this bus.
So Chance, you were here during busing, going through this in Boston, because Roslindale is a part of Boston, as well as the METCO experience. So we're going to get a little bit deeper into that, but I wanted to move on, if you don't mind, a little bit to Nieisha and Bianca. Mm-hmm. For those of you that are just tuning in, we had our guests tell us about their METCO experience in one word. So Nieisha and Bianca, because a little time has passed, if you could remind us of your word. Chance's was traumatizing and clarity, and he gave clarity around the differences of what he saw, what he went to school, where he went to school, and then also when he came home. But Nieisha, if you could remind us of your word. And then if I could ask you a question based on your word, is there anything much different from what Karma and Chance have shared thus far? And if so, if you could give us a little bit of the difference, if there is a difference of what they shared. Well, I just told the folks what your word was, but Nieisha's word was different, y'all, sorry.
That's okay. Yes, so my word was different, and I said different because that's how I felt. As a METCO student, right, you live in Boston and you go to school outside of the neighborhood that you live in. So I felt different as a child of Roxbury because I didn't go to school with the people that lived on my street, whereas some of them, they all knew each other because they all went to school together. I felt different because when I was in Sharon, I looked different. I didn't have the same experience as they did. So I kind of felt like an outsider in both my neighborhood where I lived in and also the school that I went to. So I'll leave it at that for now.
Okay. And Bianca, if you could remind us of your word and then tell us a little bit about why you said that word and what was so unique of your experience as far as being uncomfortable. You talked about, we've heard about a level of traumatizing. We're going to get deep into that a little bit. And I guess from uncomfortable, we can go into the trauma of it with Brianna and Chance, but there's presumptions, but what was it about your experience that was uncomfortable for you? Was it one or two incidents? Was it the overall? Like, go a little bit deeper into the uncomfortableness.
Of course. So I think the most uncomfortable thing for me during my time with the METCO program was just being the only Black student in almost every instance, whether it was in almost every single classroom. There was probably one or maybe two other students of color. And then in the METCO program, or at least I'll speak for Wellesley at least, they're known to kind of pocket all the METCO students in the lowest level classroom. And for me, it just never sat right. And it was nothing that was ever discussed outside of your peer group. Also, I was an athlete during my time in Wellesley. I played lacrosse from 5th to 12th grade, and lacrosse is already an uncommon sport amongst our community. So to be the only brown legs on the field, I encountered a lot of racial slurs, whether it's from folks on my own team or other teams that we've played. But just going into a sport like lacrosse, you kind of know what you are signed up for once you are essentially the only one. So just giving some solution-oriented things that my family did to kind of curb this gap was to just get me more involved in my community. I know other folks touched on kind of being two different people depending on the neighborhood you're in. So like in Wellesley, I was one person. In Boston, I was essentially a different one. So in the city, I was involved in like the Boys and Girls Clubs, the YMCAs, and an urban lacrosse league. And with those Boys and Girls Clubs or YMCAs, I would just be there literally for like 45 minutes to an hour. But that was the only time that I would be able to make relationships with people that looked like me in my community. So that kind of summarizes my uncomfortable experience with the classroom and on the lacrosse field.
Brianna, I'm going to come to you because a lot of what Bianca named and Chance got into it a little bit, and Karma as well around the realizations, and Nieisha did as well. Presumably, I would think that a lot of this, your realizations were after the fact, kind of in retrospect in 2020. But as I'm listening to you all, a lot of it could have been in present. So Brianna, you talked about traumatizing. Chance, you talked about traumatizing as well. So Brianna, with all that's been said thus far, can you correlate the trauma that comes with? Did you realize the trauma after the fact, or in the moment? You know, being young, we're not really aware of I'm being traumatized. But why did you pick traumatizing? And if you could sort of bring together, big task ask, but if you could bring together a little introduction into the trauma that comes from the experiences and realizations Bianca referred to, Nieisha referred to, Chance referred to, and so did Karma. Big ask, I'm sorry, but you host and stuff as well, so I know you got this.
Yes. Well, that's a great question. I think it's important to uplift two main things. One, METCO is a result of forced desegregation. So fourth keyword, these people did not want us in their community, in their neighborhoods. The different communities, different towns, this was being forced upon them. The second thing is, it's also important to understand in the frame of education is that you're spending over 8 hours a day in one space. That is where you establish your relationships, you establish you understand rapport. That's where you learn a lot of things. And we're seeing that now when, we're going to be learning remotely going forward. So now that's on our parents. So in our household. So those two things are important to realize. And when I said traumatizing, once I entered the door of Brookline, I was immediately stereotyped and criminalized. I was assumed that I was on subsidized lunch. I was assumed that I had an absentee father. My father came in for a disciplinary meeting because I did act out. I'm not gonna lie. I acted out in school, and they were like, "Oh, you have a father? quote unquote. And so when I say Brookline is where I learned what racism was, I mean that statement. And I'm so glad, like I mentioned this to Toy, I'm so glad she's having this dialogue, because you do internalize that. I was accused of being a thief. I was accused of being I also get the term of like I talked a lot, and my mother always said, the women that talk a lot, or the people that talk a lot in class, are the most powerful people. So I turned that power, that pain, into power and purpose. And that's why I say Brookline is why I got into politics. I found my voice because I realized one, that Brookline is the reason why we have METCO is because political figures and leadership actually made that decision. So I was like, I need to be a part of these decisions because I'm affected by these decisions directly. So back to the word of traumatizing, it was traumatizing because they wanted me to live out these stereotypes, and I was constantly fighting against it. I was actively saying, wait, no, that's not me. I'm not on subsidized lunch. Yes, my father lives with me. My parents are married. And I constantly had to defend my identity. And I feel like I was unique that I understood it in the moment because my parents were so active in my life that they reinforced that, this is not who you are. Don't listen to them. My mother was my biggest advocate, which made me into a great advocate. So that's a luxury that I had, but every METCO student doesn't have that. So I think it's important to uplift that piece. And it's also important to uplift that there's no real resources, especially in my district, there's no real resources on mental health support. Who do I go to when I'm potentially have a disciplinary action, but I feel like it's racially triggered and it's biased, and I didn't have that support. And I had my parents, but again, that was a luxury. So it's traumatizing because I was criminalized and stereotyped, but it's also traumatizing because there was no resources.
There I go. Sorry about that. So, Brianna, that, you did a good encapsulation of a lot of the issues that you dealt with, and it kind of named some of the issues that other folks presumably have dealt with walking in, just by based on what Brianna said in METCO. If something popped up missing in the classroom, were you kind of one of the first ones that were looked at or asked? Okay. Were there presumptions from the teachers that you, whether true or not, was there a presumption that you were in a single parent home? Interesting. Chance, I want to pass it over to you because, again, there is a different experience as a Black man that you have when it comes to racism. Racism is wrong, period. Gender, no identified gender or whatever. But, what was when you talked about traumatizing? You talked about the clarity. I think that in itself is a level of traumatizing. Brianna, you all, to sum it up, was a level of code switching. You had to be hood when you came home, but then you kind of had to be the I don't know how you would describe it, but the METCO student, for lack of better words. Chance, if you could talk a little bit about the trauma that you experienced, and then we're sort of going to open the floor and have an open discussion about different experiences. And then also, if there are some young people or some parents that are watching tonight that have active students in METCO, what are some of the skill sets or resources you're aware of in a mental health space that'd be helpful to them as they're coping, trying to get an education, but still dealing with everything that's being named here tonight? So Chance, a little bit about your experience with trauma, and then we're going to open it up to the floor.
Yes, the trauma aspect of it for me, there's just so many different layers to it. But what I would definitely say, one of the traumas, and I'm just gonna kind of continue, it's a continuation of what was already said about having you as a METCO student had at least 2 different identities. Me being that I was educated where I was educated, when my friends, because I did have friends, around the way that clearly went to Boston public schools, I would get teased as far as being, you sound very white. Explain that one to me. What exactly does that mean? Because I choose not to use Ebonics all of a sudden I'm labeled because I talk like I actually have sense. I don't think this has anything to do with black or white. This is choice. There's a lot of people in the city that have never been to a METCO school that choose to speak properly. So it's one of those things where I learned how to speak when I was at home, and I learned how to speak when I was in school. So yeah, and at a very young age to have to do that, you know, even before I was 10. And it's traumatizing. Also, another aspect of the trauma was I don't think I was like most kids. I was always kind of to myself, never hung around with certain cliques, but I'm sure that some of the panel can even agree with me on this. Even within METCO, there were several different cliques. You had the smart METCO kids, you had the cool METCO kids, you had the sports METCO kids. I mean, there was just a lot of separation even amongst ourselves. I remember, for example, getting on the bus. I was always the first one on the bus, but when I would miss that first stop, I'd be the last one on the bus. Wouldn't no one want to move over in their seat to let me sit? You know, so there was a lot of things just going on even amongst ourselves as students, you know, prejudging one another for whatever reasons. You know, because I was a nerdy kid, I wasn't kind of labeled cool, so I couldn't be amongst certain groups and things of that nature. It was and I don't know how it is now, because as I'm saying, I was in the class of 85. So I know a lot of these women on here, you know, are coming, yeah, so I'm 53 years old. So I know a lot of the people that are on this panel are a lot younger than me, and things may be a little bit different. But yeah, there was just trauma on so many levels. I even remember at one point, there was kind of a situation where there was turmoil between the whites and the blacks, where it got to the point where black students were bringing knives and stuff to school. I mean, it got to the point where it was getting serious.
Chance, I see a lot of heads sort of bobbing and saying yes. So you all can unmute and whatnot.
Yeah, please
so
do.
The sort of subset. So it's interesting to hear, you know, you hear these cultures in high school anyway. So it is surprising, but not surprising. So within the METCO program, you had so I'm familiar with like Newton North, Newton South, and all this. Mm-hmm. So you had the general subsets within the schools. But then are you saying, sir, that within the Boston, Roxbury, Dorchester, Mattapan, where folks came from to go to METCO, there was also, no matter what district you went to, if you went to Newton North and you were a sports person, but you went to Weymouth, you were sports, there was also that sort of, I'm a METCO sports clique member, or the fashion? Y'all all chime in here.
There was definitely, you know, rivalry amongst even METCO students. You know, I'm sure, you know, everybody wanted to rep wherever they was from, you know, and there was definitely, you know, there was different, I think METCO individuals experienced different things, you know, where some people got, and I'm grateful to hear that a lot of the panel got a lot of positivity, you know, from the experience, regardless of the negativity that existed. I'm very glad to hear that. Because that really wasn't my experience. So it's good to know that there is positivity to be taken out of it. But you know,
despite the negative. Nieisha, you're waving, you're shaking your head.
Please,
yes,
join in.
Yeah,
come on, y'all. And Bianca did as well. So Nieisha and Bianca, what I see the agreement. Where are the points of agreement?
Yeah, so there was a lot of things that Chance mentioned, and I wanted to talk specifically about one that I hear brought up a lot, and it's the talking white. And I think that oftentimes that talking white gets confused because there's, you know, speaking properly, and then separately from speaking properly, there's talking white. And I'll explain what I mean by that. I have a friend. She works in corporate America. Her voice, she can code switch and change her voice to sound white. Do you see what I'm saying? Our vocals are different. We got a little bit more bass. right? So if
about
I'm
that
on the
bass.
phone and I'm like, hi, this is Jessica, how are you? Can I help you today? That's talking white. I am changing, I'm code switching my voice so you on the other side don't know and recognize the color of my skin, because I want to be able to talk to you in a way that you might respect me. And we've learned how to code switch so well, right? We learned how to put on that voice because, as Brianna was saying, when you spend 8 hours engulfed in someone else's culture, you can switch it up with the quickness.
Quickly.
You can assimilate very well. So much so that the person on the other on the other side of the phone doesn't know your race. So, when my friend, encountered the person that she was talking to on the phone, they had lived in different states and they were, communicating over the phone, and she was looking for my friend on the floor. My friend, was like, it says her name, plain and simple across the board, Jane Doe, that's her name. And the lady knew her name, but she kept walking by like, that can't be her because she's Black.
Terrible.
And my friend was looking at her like she's confused because she thinks I'm white, because I sounded white.
It's so, thank you for the clarity, because they're sounding white, they're talking properly. Chance talked about, use of ebonics and whatnot, and that came out late. I think I was in senior year, right after high school. Bianca, you were shaking your head as well, and Brianna and Carmen, feel free to chime in as well. Bianca, what were you shaking your head? Or you shook your head like Nieisha on a few things, and I'm going down this way so we can talk about the issues, and then we're going to bring it back into how you guys handled them from a mental health standpoint and still were able to some level presumably function. Bianca.
So I wanted to talk a bit more about the cliques within METCO that Chance mentioned earlier. To be honest with you, I had a harder experience. I had a harder time dealing with the METCO students than I did the actual white students. To give you some numbers, I graduated with 450 kids, and in my class, there were only METCO students. And I'm having more issues with 8 students versus the 440 other white students that I had. And to his point, it's based on a lot of different things, your neighborhood, what clubs you're involved in, complexion, hair, whatever the case may be. And I think with a lot of us, I think your adolescence age, especially like middle school, high school, you're really going through identity crisis. And I feel like there was very little support from the METCO program on how to, especially for kids who may have just entered in the 6th grade or 7th grade, how to transition into being, going from being the majority to the minority. So I think a lot of students took that frustration out on each other. So there was a lot of rifts amongst the program. So I guess that was the only thing that I really wanted to touch on. And I think, I know Chance said he was in his 50s and I'm in my 20s, and I still had a very similar experience. And even talking to younger METCO students that are either current students or recent grads, they've all gone through the same experience, which is very disheartening, but definitely seems like it's a trend amongst or across the entire organization.
Despite generational or graduate class. Bianca and Karma, can you sort of chat? Karma, you look like you're ready. Bianca, Brianna, you might be okay. Wait a minute. Karma's smiling like, yes, I'm ready to chime in now. What in relation to what's been said in the past few minutes, what's your response to the fact around what Chase said, around the cliques, around sports and your experience? And then I've been hearing a lot, I think all of you have said at least once that there was a lack of support services. And my understanding that, the spot down on Demick was supposed to be this place that okay, so Karma, and then that's why Bianca's next. Karma, give your commentary based on what's been said so far.
Like I have almost the same exact story as Bianca. As you can tell, I am of lighter skin. So I was physically prepared going into METCO and as an elementary school student, only because both my parents went to predominantly white schools. One was in METCO, but one was adopted. So she had the other side of the fence, but she still had the same issues because, they struggle with the issues that they have. But I feel like I encountered racism in middle school and encountered colorism in high school. And out of a class of only 6 of us, which were all females except one Asian male, it was often I always got the commentary of, oh, it's because she's light skinned, or it's because it's because she has long hair, it's because her mother's half white, it's because this, it's because that. And that was like Bianca had said, I felt like I had a bigger issue with my fellow sisters in my METCO class than I did with my fellow white peers in my at Wayland. And I felt like there was more of a lack of like sensitivity along with like acknowledgement of what was going on. Specifically, sadly to say, my METCO coordinator, who most often didn't view these things as the bigger issue, because I feel like most times it was in comparison to who I needed to be in comparison to my fellow white peers versus who I needed to be as myself. So I feel like, granted, I kind of have a tough skin and I kind of moved my way through it. It didn't move me as much, but it is still something that impacted me, because it was like, I got to high school and I'm like, wow, I feel like my people who are supposed to be behind me, like we're supposed to be in this together, and and move together through this issue, is like, well, now I'm like, well, dang, I'm really by myself. Like, it's not just us against them or us against the world or us against the stereotypes. It's literally just me. Like, I have to find my place. I have to be my individuality self, because I felt like I genuinely didn't have the people that should have been there, besides my brother, who was a fellow METCO student, but he was a year under me.
So it's interesting because Bianca talked about, and I want to go, I wish I could go into this a little bit deeper, but Chance talked about his generation. Bianca talked about being in the 20s, and then still hearing some reference to those that are currently in our recent graduates. Brianna, when I asked about the presumed level of resources over on Demick Street, just because I used to work over there, I knew that the METCO office was on Demick Street. At what level, with where you can comfortably, the support levels, either through this, I would presume, central METCO office or the different high schools, what level, and this will be sort of our merger into sort of the real mental health and how you guys handle this and maintained, and what advice you would give the young people from a mental health standpoint now. But what were the things that were in place, if any? Brianna, I don't know you well, but I'm learning that face, hon. What were the things in place? And I guess I would couple that with, what would you have hoped or wished for in retrospect? And I think all of you can speak to that, and then we'll get into the sort of the mental health piece. What did you wish what was in place, and what could have been in place? And after you, I'm going to throw it back to Chance.
Yeah. One, I think this piece is missing in every educational space. It's, learning about the context of colorism, learning about our history, learning about, learning, like, I think civics should be like a staunch thing in every core curriculum. And ultimately having those, building courses within the METCO students. So I really want to mention two things that happened in the Brookline school system that were meant to kind of bridge that gap. So one, there was an organization called Sankofa, and it was for 8th grade transitioning into high school. So the purpose of that program was to basically help with their transition, mainly educationally. So it was for METCO students, but it didn't touch upon what it meant to be Black. And if they touched upon it a lot more, then I think that would be a great space to build upon. The second space, which is a kind of a problem I had with this, which caused some division within the METCO students, was a class called African American Scholars. So African American Scholars was only only for students that were scholars. They had to have a certain GPA, they had to have certain, merits. And so it excluded a lot of the other METCO kids, which created division. And I think that that could have been a great space for all METCO kids to learn about their heritage, their history. I had the opportunity to be in that class. But some of my friends that I'm friends with to this day did not have that opportunity. So I think there was division within the METCO students in Brookline, and I think they could have just been a lot more intentional with that, and that could have been a great resource. But it only got to, once again, the higher up, so the students that were getting the 4.0 GPAs. So I do think there was an effort, but they missed the mark every time. And the second piece is, and I would love to talk to these ladies offline, half of us, the ladies, went to HBCUs and half of us went to PWI. So I wonder if that was intentional, if that experience was intentional. I went to a PWI because I thought I wanted to like break the space. I was like, I don't like being the only Black woman in the room, but I like being able to, I like being able to have those hard conversations with people that don't look like me. I like being able to defy stereotypes in spaces that they expect me to be one thing, but I'm another. So I would love to talk to you guys about that. But I do think there's resources that need to be more intentional in helping and uplifting every single METCO student, regardless of academic standing, regardless of income disparities, and regardless of personalities or possible behavioral issues.
Brianna, one thing I would like to say that you called out was that the level of resources is not just confined. We're talking in the context of METCO tonight in this conversation, but you talked about resources in general and the education system needing improvement, needing to be a lot better. So Chance, if I could ask you to begin to chime in, how were your mental health awareness presumably in high school? Like, how did you, in either retrospect, how did you handle the impact on your mental health of everything that you was observing, everything in real time? I don't know if you realized at the time, and we probably weren't using the term then, but you were code switching. You would come home and be like, yo, da 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 da, and you would go out to METCO and be like, yes, Johnny. I'm just presumably or whatever. But from a mental health standpoint, because one thing about us as brothers, we don't like to front and we don't like to be fake. So how did you handle the mental health impact, and were you even woke and aware, or was your mental health awareness even peaked at the time?
Interesting. I love the way that you put that. What I can say is, for me personally, I'm kind of a gumbo. I'm a mix of all these different things. So when I was being so-called white, or at least speaking properly, because I wouldn't change the tone of my voice, that was who I was. So that was all good. But the beauty that I love is I got two different educations. I got the education from being in METCO, while I also got the education from being on the streets in Boston. So it was a thing for me. It was just my normal. It wasn't like I was being anything outside of myself. I was able to be both. Where the difficulty came in is other people accepting that. And especially on the Black side. The white side, yeah, I agree with one of the other panelists when you didn't really get much problems from them. Yeah, back when I was this was at the very beginning of METCO. So yeah, you got the stares and you felt like, you kind of felt like a animal in a zoo cage on display, to a certain extent, because these kids, there weren't too many people of color living out in those areas, especially at that time. But as I said before, I was lucky because my grandmother and grandfather, probably being one of the only Black couples in Newton in their time, was well known. So once I came on the scene and they realized, oh, that's their grandchild. Okay, there was kind of like the open arms. And I don't know if they still have it now. And I would love to hear this from the other panelists, but they had what was called host families.
I didn't go to METCO, and I'm familiar with that. You would stay the weekend out there or whatever with the—
Man, look, my host family, they actually knew my grandfather. My grandfather was the armed security guard at the main bank in Newton Center. So he knew everyone. He pretty much knew the whole neighborhood, and they knew him. But yeah, the host family was kind of a weird experience, to say the least.
That's a nice way to put it, sir. But how did you, what was the mental health impact, Chance, though? Was there any? And then if there was, or if you have to say it in retrospect, how did you handle it? Or how do you think you handled it?
I could say this, us as Black and brown people, at the end of the day, we were built to have tough skin, because we're stuck in a situation even to this very day where we just kind of have to accept the realities that are, even if they're not in our favor. So we're built from trauma, but based off of that trauma, we become tougher. Our skin becomes a lot tougher because there's not many options for us outside of what actually exists, even though it may not be for the best or in our best interest as people of color. Because personally, I don't think that, and forgive me for saying this, I don't mean to offend any of the other panelists, but I don't really think that METCO is the best thing for us. I think it's outdated as far as and just what's going on today clearly demonstrates that there's great division still amongst Black and brown and white communities. So this idea, as was mentioned earlier, that we were forced into these situations, I think it's clear that those ideas were good ideas, but the reality of today is that, it's just not really benefiting. I think it's almost hurting as much as it is benefiting, for our community, because it not only are you separated from your own community, which causes division between you and your community. And as a child, that's difficult, because now you're getting teased because you're a METCO kid, so, you're in a no-win situation. You didn't ask to be a METCO kid. Your parents put you there because they thought it was the best thing for you. And I understand why parents would make that decision, because my grandmother made that decision for me. Interestingly enough, I'm the youngest of four. My grandmother put the two youngest in METCO and left the other two in Boston public schools. Interestingly enough, my sister and I that were in METCO would be considered to be more successful, where my oldest brother and sister have struggled all their lives.
Chance, you're tapping into a few things, and Brianna, this is the R word for me. I'm getting better with it, but Brianna was basically saying what you talked about, Chance, and our tough skin, and this speaks to the mental health, is resiliency. And I just personally, this isn't the opinion of DeeDee's Cry, no Toy Burton, or any of the guests. Resiliency for me is an issue, because Brianna, you quickly recognized that what Chance said was he kept going through and developing tougher skin. The way we become resilient is to keep going through different types of crap rather, to develop that tougher skin. And we're getting down in time, and I got to speed some things up. Bianca, based on what Chance just said and talked about it not being, and Chance, thank you so much. What he said about basically a re-examination of the impact and of the this wasn't his words exactly, but the value or considering the unspoken impact that a fourth grader may be going through, that still wants to be cool, with his cousins and his boys, but a couple of years in and he's using different words or talking properly. And who was it? Nieisha, thank you for the clarity of talking white or sounding white versus talking proper. I've never heard it broke down like that before, so thank you for that. But Bianca, based on recent graduates and those that are in, would you mind sharing a level of your assessment of, is it still, do you think it's beneficial for the presumed educational academic outcome versus what goes on behind the scenes and what the individual student winds up dealing with from a mental health standpoint?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And yikes. So that's a good question.
Sorry.
In retrospect, I guess overall, I think that METCO, the purpose of METCO, I think it's a great organization. I agree with Chance in terms of the policies being outdated. But I think even for all of us to be on this call, it kind of shows you how large the alumni network is. And I think that that's something that METCO has to utilize a bit more. And I think that it's very important for alums to get involved. I think that's the only way that the program will continue to stay afloat. I think you can have conversations about the lack of resources for days and for hours and nothing will change. But I think even for all of us in this group, I think that each of us have some type of skill or resource that we can provide to the program. Whether you are a therapist, whether you are a TV analyst. And I think that these are all of the avenues that we've all decided to take on as our full-time career. Most of them are not taught in the classroom. So even exposing the few METCO students that were in our respective towns to some of the things that we've been exposed to as adults, I think it will go a long way. But I mean, just even looking back at my experience and, you know, thinking about some of the instances that happened between me and my like METCO peers or me and my white peers, realistically, if I was in that role as a METCO coordinator or a METCO director, that's a lot of responsibility for one person to tackle. That's, I mean, 400 years of systemic racism. I can't ask for a coordinator or a director to kind of solve all of those issues overnight. So I think that there needs to be a stronger, whether it's an alumni program or whatever the case may be. I actually recently joined the METCO Advisory Board just to kind of help out to hopefully see progression and help other students to avoid going through circumstances that I went through. So I guess that would be the only takeaway or recommendation I would have, is just for folks to get as involved as possible. Just give back some time if you have it.
I think that is important because the mentorship piece is good. And, you know, a young person may be going through similar things that you all have went through, and a parent hears, you know, understands generally, but another Chance in this generation talking to, you know, Chance now, there's a little bit, it's different, you know what I mean? They have a different level of understanding. Nieisha, actually, I'm going to end with Nieisha because she kind of moves in this mental health space, but Karma, what would you say based on everything that we talked about tonight, if you were to leave encouragement to the younger people or to parents from a mental health space, everything that you've endured and accomplished, what would you say to current METCO students if they are currently dealing with the frustration, the trauma, the identity crisis to some extent, you know, the cliques and things that a Chance raised and others raised? From a mental health standpoint, what encouragement or what guidance would you leave to young people or to students and parents that may be watching?
For students personally, I would say, one, keep plugging away, because at the end of the day, it's only going to build you and who you are as a character, along with making a difference in that community and really showing who you are, no matter what label or stereotype is put on you. And for a parent, I would say just be there. Like, personally, I know it's sometimes hard because, you know, also while being in that vicinity around these people, while you are still trying to find that sense of individuality and sometimes trying to figure out who you are, us as children oftentimes push our parents out of that equation because we're like, we want to do it ourselves. We want to learn who to be. We want to be who we make ourselves out to be. So it does become hard sometimes. And I feel like parents do sometimes get frustrated as well. Like, well, they don't want me in there. And then it's also that teenage, like, oh, they don't want me in their business. They don't want me to do this. They don't want me to do that. But I think the best thing to do is be there. No questions asked. If you feel like you see your child struggling, or you see that there's different behavior, you see that they have a different perception about certain things, like, just even if it's as simple as, you know, how's school going, how's your classes going, who's in your classes, who's your teachers, like, you know, just little things like that. I feel like it has to start somewhere, and it makes a big difference for you just to be there and understand, like, where your child stands in that predicament, and understanding, like, even if you were never even a METCO student, just kind of taking a step back and looking at the bigger picture of understanding, like, what they may be going through. Because I feel like oftentimes that kind of just goes out the window, and then that kind of taps into the mental health aspect, where then also sometimes those children feel like they're alone, or they're pushed into a corner and they feel like they have no one to talk to, when it does come to being outside of school or whatever the case may be. So personally, I feel like as a fellow METCO student, the biggest thing is just show up and show out in a positive way. And from experience, I feel like the best thing to do I mean, clearly I'm not a parent, but the best thing for me was that my parents were there, like, no questions asked. Even if I did push them away at some point, they always had that open mindset, like, well, come talk to me when you're ready. Come let me know what's going on. Be open, let me know, like, oh, today someone told me that I was only pretty because I was lighter skinned, or, you know, like, just be open to just have that open playing field where they are comfortable enough to be like, you know, mom or dad or whoever, I went through this today. Even if they don't tell you in the moment, they'll be willing to open up to you, as long as you're not putting that pressure on them, but you're allowing that space to be there mentally for them to get things off their chest, while knowing that some of these things in certain situations can be traumatizing, or it can be confusing, or it can be interesting to them, and they may not all fully understand what exactly they are learning, or what they're going through, or who they're becoming. So
Carmen, thank you for that. The parental role is definitely key. And to also, I would add to that, to maybe parents be very aware if you notice changes in your child's behavior, as far as being withdrawn, sleeping more, or, you know, I'm not a clinician, and that's why we're going to end with Nieisha, because she's the closest thing to, but the closest, I say closest thing to, so I'm not giving out credentials, but we don't have our Dr. Brandy with us tonight. So we're going to have to try to, between the two of us, make it up. But Brianna, I wanted to come to you and ask you, from a mental health, and you're sending wonderful notes in the chat around some context of what our young people deal with. But from a mental health standpoint, what would you say to, and I mean, you talked about a lot about the resources and had a interesting response around a central office. What would you say to any coordinator that may go back and watch this? We know that METCO has began to follow DeeDee's Cry and stuff on Twitter or Toy. So if they watch this and there's an opportunity for them to be educated, awesome. What is it that you would say to resource coordinators, or what did you call them? School coordinators? Nieisha's looking like there is no resource coordinator. So what would you say to the METCO? Nieisha was like, wait, what does that do? What would you say to the resource coordinators, or those that are working to support the young people?
Well, I definitely, first and foremost, I think this should be across the board, but there should be mental health days. Like, I should be able to take a sick mental health day. Just the way I have a cough is the same. It's the same way I feel. My heart is heavy. I can't do it today. I think that should be implemented across every education system. But since we're talking about the top of METCO, I think we need to implement them in our METCO programs. And maybe a cool twist on it, and if it can't be across the education system, having METCO schools having a METCO student be able to go to their METCO coordinator and say, I need a mental health day today. Like I can't, you know, can I be hang out in the METCO room and do my homework here? Can I coordinate with some of my teachers and be able to do classes within the METCO room? Whatever that looks like, I think that needs to be established today, because there are times when you are overwhelmed by the code switching, the criminalization, the stereotypes, and the fact that you may not have at that, you know, at 15, 14, you might not have the understanding to fully identify it, but you feel it. And we need spaces to feel it and heal. So I like what Karma said. I like what Karma said when she said, keep chugging along, but I really think that we need to just stop. There needs to be times where we're just like,
be able to keep
going.
Yeah.
But you need to check in with yourself. You need to relax, because like how you said, James, resiliency is result of going through a lot of crap. But you need to take a break. You need to relax. You need to rejuvenate. You need to take a step back. And that's I think is crucial. And that's I think we forget about in the Black community, because we're always, you know, we're always on go. We're always performing. We're always showing up. And sometimes we need to stop. So I think those mental health days are crucial. I do think there needs to be more coordination with METCO students across the board, not just ones that are doing academically well, and not just the ones that could, you know, throw a ball. And I think that we need to make sure that we're uplifting every single student, not just the talented ones. And that looks like having, you know, residual, having annual, and having monthly, or whatever that looks like, check-ins with these students. And their students, you have to go to them. We can't go to the DEMIC office. We're 15, 14 years old. You need to come to us. Okay. So that's the other thing I want to highlight. And then lastly, we do need across the board more support for parents. Trainings, whether that looks like trainings, whether it looks like, you know, making sure the resources are getting home, and there's more coordination on that end with the METCO coordinator and the parents. Because I just had nosy parents, the active parents that just made it their business. But there are students that don't have that luxury, like I mentioned earlier. So more coordination with parents, definitely. You know, standard check-ins with every single METCO student, and having, you know, established mental health days for METCO students. Those are my 3 takeaways that I hope that it somehow floats to DEMIC and somehow gets to the METCO advisory group.
Brianna, thank you. And Karma, thank you for raising that as well, because someone was saying earlier that parents, that young people don't want parents involved or whatever, but the truth of the matter is, it's a normal teen thing to say no, but the truth of the matter is they want the structure and they want, you know, sort of the encouragement. So Nieisha, I'm going to come to you and ask you our closest thing to a clinician this evening. I don't know why I keep saying that, but what would you say sort of to the general audience watching in reference to the METCO program, your own experience, everything you heard this evening, and then also to a level of providers that the METCO coordinators, the teachers, the host parent, the host homes that have good intentions, but just might force it, as the young people say sometimes, overdo it or whatever. So what would you say, Nieisha, as we get ready to kind of, you know, wrap up?
Yeah, I actually wanted to say that as I sit here and listen to everybody talking, I also think about the time that we're in with the racial tension. I wonder how it would feel right now to be a METCO student. I know that I would be.
Can you say that again, please? Say it again slowly so they can hear it and then pause.
Right. So with all the racial tension going on now, right, the uprising, you know, I was in school during the 90s. I graduated in 2005 and 2001, in 2001. And it was pretty calm for the most part, right? But now we're having an uprising, an uptick of, you know, racial tensions, and, you know, we're super divided as a country, you know, our leadership and everything. We have some people that are for the president and some people that are against the president. With all of these combative, views, I wonder how it would feel right now to be a Black child in the Boston area having to go from Boston to a predominantly white suburb. I think that it's like probably times 10 of what I went through, and maybe times 10 of what everybody else went through. So I think that because of this, and I guess because we're home now, so we don't have to really necessarily deal with it because we're not in the same space per se. But it does concern me. And I think that we need people, if you're going to be a coordinator or anything of that nature, we definitely need advocates for the children, okay? Because they can't necessarily speak up for themselves in some cases. They're dealing with confidence issues and so on and so forth. The parents and the adults need to speak up for them and almost be able to predict when things might be not going so well. So in the case of racial uprising and stuff like that, having a conversation, getting in front of it and being like, hey, look, this is what's going on right now. This is very uncomfortable for our students. Let's talk about it. Let's have a conversation. Let's be open and honest with the right people in the room, and make sure that we're taking care of it. Because if we're having these discussions at our job, right? If we think about diversity and inclusion at the workplace, shouldn't we be having some kind of similar conversations in the school, specifically if it's a predominantly white, not institution, school, right? I mean, like we gotta think about this. And yeah, so for me, it's about not putting the ernst and the weight on the METCO child, right? The child that's in METCO. They're already dealing with a lot. They're already waking up at 5 a.m., having to go out to school when it's dark outside, then having to come home and feel like they're going through too much. They don't need any additional pressure on them. Put the pressure on the adults. Put the pressure on the politicians. Put the pressure on the coordinators. They don't need any more pressure. They're trying to do well in school, get into college so that they can be successful and fulfill, the dreams of, it's just a lot. It's a lot. And I almost think that, we got, my business mind is on, right?
Come.
My business mind is turned on, it's engaged. We have to also think about the cost benefit of it all. Is it really worth it? If we're adding all of these things and we're putting money into, is it worth it to do all of that just so that we can make the program better? Or should we be refocusing and reusing our resources so that our schools in our city can be sufficient enough to produce quality education?
Chance is about to lose his mind, because it's not even so much the budget line item, but sort of the cultural it may need to be reexamined. It started off at one point, but the truth of the matter is METCO is in existence because there were not as many viable options in Boston for Black students. So, the level of what METCO offers should be expedited here in the city of Boston. And I don't want to get in too much trouble because I was civically active today so with that being said, Robin, you and Toya have been so patient and you all have been sitting there, and Robin, I'm sure you've been looking at the questions and the comments. Robin, do we have any questions either from students and or parents? Robin, come off of mute. Robin, take yourself off of mute. Mute, Mike, your mic.
Sorry,
there she goes.
Okay,
you're good.
Couldn't find it quick enough. Well, there's mostly comments, not too many questions. I want to say thank you for Amanda, Christian, Rhonda, Anna, Irvine, Vania, Barry, Barry again for all tuning in, Kathy, Charmaine. So some people are saying they had, good experiences, and Vanya was saying that Braintree did not have host families, which makes me think or wonder why each host city doesn't have the same offerings. It should be equal across the board. Barry was saying the program needs to be revamped, but he had a good transition. He still talks to the people he graduated to this day. So there are some, and a lot of times I do know that it depends on what city you're in, depending on your experiences, because some host families in that particular city were more welcoming and did a lot more with the program than, say, other cities. And let's see. I think, unfortunately, with every program, you have to remember, no matter what the program is, no matter if it's a nonprofit, a for-profit, a corporation, no matter what, everything has its limits based on the resources, which are its people, the money behind it, and also the location. So a lot of the things that we're blaming METCO for, technically, it's not necessarily METCO's problem. It's because every program has those limitations. So it's good to hear. I'm glad you brought up the conversation of alumni from any METCO getting involved, because you have gone through the experiences, good and bad. Getting involved with the current METCO administration. And I know it's tough because I tried to battle it and tried to get my kids through METCO, and it was just a battle, trust me. So I just dropped that ball, and I am a fighter. But because you have gone through the system, your voices might be better heard, maybe not easily heard, but better heard by those that are still in the METCO administration. And yes, get in there kicking and fighting, and be there for the mentors of the current students. Be there for the administration and get your voices heard, because everything you all have said tonight, trust me, there are thousands of families that have the same experience through METCO. You all have the mic and the platform right now. So hopefully, even Chance, even though you said you did not graduate from high school, your experience is not different from many Black students through METCO, male and female, that did not finish high school. So your voice is needed and needs to be at the table to represent them and to represent your experience and help the current families. Just wanted to say that.
Robin, can I affirm what you were saying? And I know you were looking at the comments before you started speaking, but within the last couple of minutes, there's a comment there.
Okay.
METCO Incorporated headquarters.
Okay, I see it.
Okay, then you go ahead and take it. Go ahead, you read it.
So METCO Incorporated is watching tonight, and they say, thank you for the education, DeeDee's Cry and panelists. Yeah, we're following. This conversation is so important. Two things, METCO must serve the students better, and they have musts in stars. So we know there's emphasis. I didn't add that on my own.
I can see it in a test.
It cannot be a trade of trauma in exchange for coursework. That's deep. I'm going to read that again. It cannot be a trade of trauma in exchange for coursework. And the alumni community can be so powerful in supporting them. Your wisdom, strength, and truth are the real school. So I applaud that comment. And again, knowing that as alumni, METCO alumni, they are limited. Every year they have to fight for a budget. Every year, like we hear it, we see it in the news, and I see it, and they ask for people to support them and send the letters to the state office. And I support them every year, even though I don't have children in METCO. So when people are asking for support and asking for signatures, they are doing it for a reason. Numbers, there is strength in numbers. So you all are part of the numbers who graduated. So hopefully you will be the strength of the future of METCO for as long as it's needed. Of course, we wish and would love if every city, the public schools, something like a METCO was not needed. But while it is needed, your help is appreciated and needed.
So again, for those who may have joined late, I just want to introduce myself and DeeDee's Cry. My name is Burton, and I am founder and executive director of DeeDee's Cry. I started DeeDee's Cry is named after my sister, Denita Shayne Morris, who died by suicide when she was 23 in 1986. I started DeeDee's Cry in 2017 after I noticed that organizations that focus on mental health and suicide prevention really didn't do their outreach in communities of color. So I started DeeDee's Cry to bring mental health awareness and suicide prevention to Roxbury, Dorchester, Mattapan, and all who wants to listen. If you enjoy DeeDee's Cry and want to support DeeDee's Cry, you can write a check, make it out to the Louis D. Brown Peace Institute. They are our fiscal sponsor, and mail it to 2 John Elliott Square, 2C, Roxbury, Mass. 02119. And please put DeeDee's Cry in the memo section. So the check should be made out to the Louis D. Brown Peace Institute, but put DeeDee's Cry in the memo section. And next week, next Sunday, DeeDee's Cry will be celebrating its 3-year anniversary. So join us, however, we're right now. So Sunday at 5 o'clock, join us as we celebrate that milestone. And anything else, Robin? Am I forgetting anything?
I just want to repeat it because it was flickering a little bit. So I just want to repeat that next Sunday, DeeDee's Cry is celebrating its 3rd year anniversary. We're going to have a gala. It's usually in person, but obviously with COVID, we're going to be safe and we're going to do it on Zoom. So everybody, please check out DeeDee's Cry Facebook page for the link or to register, or also deedescry.com is the website. We want to thank tonight's sponsors for being there, which is the Louis D. Brown Peace Institute, also Java for Jimmy, and also the Roxbury Unity Parade. And I would love to just say that please don't think because we have supporters that you are not a supporter as a viewer. And again, we accept and would welcome any donation that you could give, no matter how big or small. It could be a $5 in a check, because trust me, it will be worth and used for this work. DeeDee's Cry is always and only offering these information sessions for free to everyone. So any support you can give is definitely appreciated. And I think that's it.
No, I do have one more thing. Because of the support of the Boston Foundation, DeeDee's Cry is giving out e-gift cards. So if you go on deedescry.com and click on the resource tab in COVID-19, fill out an application if you are in the Roxbury, Mattapan, Dorchester area and in need of support if COVID-19 has you behind in bills, or if you lost your employment. Please go on our website and fill out an application so we can help you and assist you.
And Toy, did you want to share the other announcement that you put out, or you want to save that for later?
No, we could say that one next week.
For the next week. Okay. All right. Robin, guest, Toy, as the digital director for DeeDee's Cry, I would like to thank all of you for attending this evening. Thank you for your transparency and your contributions to this panel. I'm going to venture and maybe put Toy out there a little bit. I think at some point we need to maybe do another check-in, maybe when school starts or after they go back after virtual, because Nieisha, as you said, having a sense of where they are now in this climate, I think is very interesting. Everything is exacerbated now in this climate. Everything that you all named is exacerbated even more so now, so thank you all, everyone, for tuning in this evening. And it was a pleasure to host this. And again, to our panelists, thank you all so much. And we probably will at some point, so it can get me later, have another session like this later in the fall with METCO. But thank you all so much. And we will be in touch. And don't forget, next Sunday at 5 p.m., DeeDee's Cry 3rd Anniversary Gala will be taking place here on DeeDee's Cry via Zoom, but go to the page to get the information. Thank you all so much. Everybody have a good evening and have a good night. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good one.
Take care, everyone.